Hello, my name is David. I am the only child of my family. I was a spoiled kid getting everything I wanted without much effort. My family lives in Dayton. I attended high school in Dayton and moved to a different city for college in 2007. During the first year, I stayed in a private dormitory. Later, my classmate Alex and I moved into a house together. Like me, he didn't have any financial troubles. We came home whenever we wanted and spent our time as we pleased. The house we stayed in was a 3-story, semi-detached building. The ground floor and the attic were empty. Our landlord was an elderly lady who lived in another city. She stayed in the ground floor apartment of the house from spring until the end of summer. The top floor was partially furnished, but she didn't want to rent it out without proper renovation. There was a small garden in front of the house and a garage for a car. After her husband passed away, she bought another house in another town since her children weren't living there either. She spent winters there and summers here. As you can understand, we didn't have any neighbors. Most of the surrounding houses were semi-detached buildings like ours. We were entering our 3rd year of university. Over these 3 years, we had made some close friends. Alex was already like a brother to me. We used to invite our friends over and hang out until dawn. Since he had evening classes, we didn't have to worry about waking up early. It was Monday. We woke up around 11 o'clock, had breakfast together with Alex, and then left the house. We walked to the bus stop on the main street to catch the bus. At one point, Alex turned to me and said he liked a girl named Amy. Amy was in our class, a very cheerful and beautiful girl. He had been brooding over this for days. I guess he was in love. He didn't know how to approach her. When he asked me, I encouraged him a bit. I said, "Do it today or tomorrow. Don't hold it in. Just tell her how you feel. I think it'll make you happy." After my pep talk, Alex said, "Then after class, wait for me at the cafe where we always hang out. I'll try talking to Amy when we leave." We agreed to meet later. We attended classes and spent the evening as usual. After class, I said goodbye to Alex and headed to the cafe. I sat down, sipped my coffee, and waited. While wondering what he was doing, the cafe door opened, and Alex walked in, looking around for me. I raised my hand to signal him to come over. I was curious about what happened. He came over quickly and sat across from me. "So, did you talk to her?" I asked. "Yes, I did," Alex replied with a grim expression. "And what did she say?" I asked again. "She said she doesn't feel the same way about me," he replied. It seemed like I would have to console Alex. "Forget about it. If she doesn't want you, it's her loss, I think." I tried to comfort him, but it was clear he wasn't listening to me. We sat for a while longer, and then left the cafe. We came home and talked about the same thing for hours. It was the first time I had seen Alex so devastated and sad. I was actually surprised because he was usually very mature and level-headed. But this topic was different. He had invested so much in it emotionally. When he went to his room to sleep, I sat on the balcony chair to smoke a cigarette. I leaned my feet against the railing and lit my cigarette. I was gazing at the house across the street. There was a terrace on top of that house too, but it was under construction, with cement bags and bricks lying around. As I looked at them, my eyes suddenly caught the balcony on the lower floor of that house. It almost made me fall out of fear. I dropped my cigarette, took my feet off the railing, and stared at that balcony, trying to comprehend what I had just seen. An elderly woman with disheveled hair and eyes bulging out of their sockets was smoking a cigarette and staring at me. Her gaze was so intense that I didn't even want to move. Her appearance frightened me a lot, and for some reason, I was afraid I might hear her voice too, which added to my fear in the middle of the night. With a momentary courage, I dared to glance away from the old woman and stood up from the chair. I was about to head inside when I heard the voice. I turned my head again. The woman smiled in such a way that I thought my mind would snap for a moment. I quickly opened the door and threw myself inside. I turned the lock repeatedly out of fear. I tried to calm down, but I couldn't shake off the fear because I didn't understand what was happening. I stood there for a while, pondering. I had never seen anyone like that in the house across from ours before. No, I had never seen anyone like that anywhere. I hesitated between telling Alex or not. Summoning another bout of courage, I gently slid the curtain aside and looked at the balcony across. There was no one there. I closed the curtain again and went to bed. If Alex hadn't been feeling down, I might have told him, but now it seemed absurd to mention such a thing. I spent almost the whole night chatting with friends on my phone to distract myself. I must have fallen asleep in the early hours of the morning. When morning came, Alex still seemed down. While having breakfast, I casually asked if he had ever seen an old woman in the house across the street before. Alex replied, "No, I haven't. Why?" I then told him about the incident from last night. Alex was intrigued, but he couldn't make sense of it. We left the house to go to school. Since I had mentioned the incident, both of us scrutinized the house thoroughly as we walked, trying to see if there was anything unusual. Nothing seemed abnormal. We continued on our way, reached the main street, and boarded the bus. After classes, as Alex and I were heading to the market to grab a bite to eat, Morgan joined us. After having a meal together, we went back to our place. As we chatted, time passed and it was well past midnight. We froze and exchanged looks when we heard a creaking noise from upstairs. Morgan asked, "What's surprising you? Is there no one upstairs?" Alex and I turned to Morgan and told him that the upstairs was vacant. At that moment, it felt like someone was walking right above us. With three of us together, we gathered courage and started ascending slowly with sticks and a knife in our hands. As we reached the top of the stairs and approached the door, our eyes widened again. The door was wide open. "Who's there?" Alex shouted, but there was no reply. We entered cautiously, despite being three. I turned on the light switch in the corridor. We moved forward in the house's hallway and opened the door to the first room. No one was there. We proceeded to the second room. Again, no one was there. We made our way to the room at the end of the hallway. Alex grabbed the door handle and opened it suddenly. The three of us looked into the room in astonishment. "How is this possible? No one's here either," we exclaimed. We searched every nook and cranny, including the bathroom, toilet, and terrace, but we couldn't find a single trace of anyone. We went downstairs and entered the house. We couldn't understand how it was left open since we didn't have the key to the upstairs. We decided not to call the landlady, Mrs. Clara, that day because it was late. The next day, we called Mrs. Clara to explain the situation. She informed us that her nephew was in our city and would come to check the place and lock it up. We agreed and hung up the phone. We couldn't sleep properly that night, so we decided to skip school the next day. In the evening, the doorbell rang. We pressed the intercom. At our door stood a man in his 40s. "Good evening. I'm here for the upstairs apartment," he said. We explained the situation to him, just as we had told Mrs. Clara. The man, with a tense expression that never changed, replied, "All right, there's nothing to worry about. I'll have a look around and then lock it up." After he closed the door, his tension had irritated us, and we cursed him behind his back. About half an hour later, the doorbell rang again. We opened the door once more. We didn't know who was coming up the stairs. When the man reached the door, we were shocked. It was the same man again. "Hello, I'm Victor. Mrs. Clara sent me. I'm her nephew. I guess the door has been opened," he said as he began to speak. We experienced shock for the second time. "But you just came," Alex interjected. The man laughed, saying, "What do you mean?" With a puzzled expression, I intervened, telling him that he had come up to check the house half an hour ago. The man looked at us with a puzzled expression. "No," he said. "This is my first time here. That's why I introduced myself." We then went upstairs together to check. The door was closed. We opened it and went inside. After another search, we realized that no one was there. This situation was now seriously frightening us. The man seemed surprised by our condition but tried to appear indifferent. "All right, guys, there's no problem," he said. He locked the door and left the house. Upon entering the house, Morgan, Alex, and I thoroughly discussed the situation. Either we were losing our minds or something was happening in this house. The woman I saw across the street, the noises from upstairs, and now that mysterious man. What was going on? A few days had passed without any trouble. One day, while I was sitting in the university cafeteria, Alex came to me excitedly and said he was going out to dinner with Amy in the evening. I was also very happy about this. Finally, he was going to have dinner with the girl he had been talking about for days. Since I didn't like being alone at home in the evening, I had gone back to our place with Morgan. Later in the evening, there was a knock on the door. Morgan went to answer it. Then he came and said a lady called from downstairs, looking for me. When I looked down the stairs, I realized it was Mrs. Clara. I quickly went downstairs with joy to welcome her. "Welcome, Mrs. Clara," I said. After what happened upstairs, I couldn't resist and decided to come too. "I'll stay for a week and then leave," she said. After chatting a bit more, I went back to my apartment, and she went back to hers. After having dinner with Morgan, I went out to the balcony to smoke. I sat on the chair again and lit a cigarette. At that moment, my eyes wandered to the opposite building again. In the darkness of the terrace floor, someone was slowly approaching the edge. The person's face became visible in the moonlight. It was Alex. I was startled for a moment. I stood up and yelled, "What are you doing there?" As soon as I asked this question, he smiled slightly and then burst into laughter. At that moment, the balcony door behind me opened. I quickly turned around and saw Alex behind me. I turned back to the opposite building. No one was there. I was speechless. Alex, seeing my strange behavior, asked, "What's wrong, David?" Stuttering, I said, "I saw you over there." He was also scared. "Come inside," he said. My mind was in a whirl, not once, but twice. We tried to figure out what this situation was all about. Alex intervened, saying, "We met Amy and had dinner. She seemed scared of me and we didn't stay long." Then Morgan spoke up. "Every time I fall asleep here, I wake up from a nightmare." After these words, we thought of seeking help. I told Alex about Mrs. Clara's visit. Alex suggested that maybe Mrs. Clara had a suggestion for this situation. "Let's go knock on her door and visit her," he said. Since it was already 11 p.m., we decided to wait until early morning to visit her and continued sitting for a while before going to bed. Morgan and I were sleeping in the same room. Around 1 a.m., we were awakened by screams coming from Alex's room. Morgan and I jumped out of bed. We quickly went and opened Alex's door. Oh my God. Alex was crouched against the wall, hiding his head in fear and looking out the window. We turned our heads towards the window. There was nothing there. We lifted Alex from the floor and tried to calm him down. He wasn't listening to us, and due to fear, he didn't even know what he was doing. As I was trying to get him out of his room, the bathroom door opened. We all froze. It was Amy. Her hair was disheveled, her eyes bloodshot. "Amy?" I involuntarily shouted. She started mumbling something in a language we didn't understand. When we looked down at her feet, we saw that they were turned backwards. Quickly, the three of us opened the front door and started running downstairs. At that moment, Mrs. Clara, who lived downstairs, came out. When she saw her, we screamed and tried to explain the situation frantically. After listening to us, Mrs. Clara said, "Youngsters, calm down. No one can harm you here." Meanwhile, the door of her house opened completely, and the person who came out was the disheveled woman with bulging eyes that I had seen in the opposite apartment while smoking. It was then that Mrs. Clara's aunt burst into laughter, echoing in our ears. We practically threw ourselves out of the building, screaming as we ran. All three of us were out of our minds. We jumped into a taxi from the taxi stand on the street and told the driver to take us to the police station. When we got there, we tried to explain our situation. They didn't believe us at first. Then, unable to resist our insistence, they went back to the house with a team. We opened the door and entered the building. Mrs. Clara's door was closed. We went into our apartment afterward. The police searched everywhere but found nothing. They searched the whole building. When they couldn't find anything, they said, "If you experience this again, let us know," and left. We went to Morgan's house that night because we were afraid to stay in that house. Later, we talked to Mrs. Clara and told her we were leaving the house. We rented another place and moved there. We didn't experience any more such incidents in that house. According to rumors we later heard, Mrs. Clara had dealt with witchcraft in the past, so her neighbors avoided her. Thankfully, we escaped from that house without any harm or losing our minds. May God not test anyone in this way.